before. So, well, hey, thanks for being here. Hopefully it was fun for you and kind of a cool inside look into what a D group night looks like. Obviously a little different, some moving parts with Rick and John here as well, and kind of a unique focus. But that's been one of the things for me I've really enjoyed in the last couple of years is our new rhythm of meeting together every other week and being able to have that large group community, but they still have an hour down in their small groups with their leaders, and it's just been a really cool balance, and it's been really fun for me to hear stories, especially from leaders, about just what God's doing in that time together in larger group community with kids from other schools and different grades, and also in their small group time as well. So we're going to kind of take a left turn here and talk some parent information about mission trips and kind of walk that road. Hopefully in the back of the room you received a packet. There's one for each trip, and you can feel free. This is casual, so if you need more coffee or you didn't grab a packet or whatever, you can just get up and go do that. Amy Elfman led the way. Good job. Grace that's fun to watch her worship. That's always good. So, hey, let's just dive in. Brett, you can head over to that next slide there, and just thought it's always kind of helpful to just briefly talk about why missions. Like, what's the point? I mean, there's a lot of people that might say, like, why don't you just send a check for $30 or $40 or $50,000 to Ecuador and let them do whatever they do with that money, and that would be a better use of time and resources and things like that. And Rick and John both talked a little bit about this as they were sharing, but really this is just a simple version of probably the many different reasons we could talk about the importance of missions. I love that John says the Bible tells you, like, that's what we should do. It's not really a gentle ask, but more of a requirement. But the relationship piece is one of the things that we always really hone in on. We'll talk a little bit more about this here in a few moments, but the fact that we're coming together as a team, much of the team already in good, deep relationship with other leaders or maybe parents that come along or their peers as well. One of the things that we always see and really appreciate about mission trips is just the relationships that form in the training process. One of the main reasons we do training meetings is really for team building. And then just the relationships that form after you spend a week or 2 weeks with a bunch of other people on a trip. And the next one, we've talked a lot about this with Rick and John, but just a partnership piece. Again, there's a lot of people that might think that, like, to go on a mission, to go to Ecuador or to Milwaukee or to the Twin Cities, like feeling as if like we're Superman coming to go serve these needy people and save the day, and everything will be fine after we are there for 7 days or 11 days or whatever the case might be. But one of the things that I really value the most about Chapel Street Mission, something I've inherited that's way before me, is the deep partnerships that have been formed throughout the years. We'll talk more about that and when we look at some of the different trips. But a mission trip it's a lot more than just us picking a spot on a map and thinking, oh, we could go do some good in this community or in this country. There's a long-standing partnership or a building partnership when it comes to Godtown, and we really enjoy the chance to really serve together. And personally, one of the things that I enjoy is then on the receiving end for us, I shared a bit about that a few moments ago, but the fact that Rick and John come and come here every year. If you were at the first training meeting for the Twin Cities or Ecuador last year, each of them were there, and we've had different partners from Cabo and Milwaukee, and it's not just us going to be some cheap labor for them, and it's not us going to save the day for them, but it's really a unique partnership that we've formed. And then that kind of leads to impact, and I think if you look at Serve the World and all the amazing things that God has done in and through our church, and these student short-term trips are just a piece of the amazing thing God's doing through us in his kingdom. If you want to go to the next slide, Brett, I just thought it'd be helpful to share just a little bit of history of student missions. I know that a lot of you guys, looking around the room, you've had kids going on mission trips for quite a while, and I'm sure some of you have never had a student go on a mission trip before. I think it's important when we talk about the partnership and kind of the reason we go on missions is that really what your student would be a part of this summer is way bigger than just a 1-week experience for them. It's something that, as you can see here on the slide, began at Chapel Street Church when Brian Coffey brought the first student mission trip group to a place in rural Mexico. Actually, I asked Brian about this. I got a picture. I thought we'd spice this meeting up a little bit. So this is Brian. Can you tell which one he is? I told him I was going to show it. He's the one in the bottom right. It kind of looks like Jesse Coffee from 35 years ago, right? Yeah. But Brian he told me 6. I count more than that, but a small handful of students to a place in Mexico. And actually, I talked with him this morning. He said that there was like a part-time youth pastor before him, but to his knowledge, they hadn't done mission. So he was kind of the first one to be obedient to what John has talked about and to go and to be on mission and bring in a group of students to do that. You can go back to the next slide even. This one. So that started in 1987, and then just kind of a few highlights along the way. There was mission trips. I know Brian brought groups to Puerto Rico and different places. Rick talked about this. In 1999, the first student mission trip went to El Refugio. Pastor Jeff led that team. It was actually before Rick and the mission organization owned the property that the camp is on. And so they were really on the ground right from the beginning, we as a church, and Rick shared that as well. I've been a part of that for a very long time. And then try to narrow it down to a few bullet points. You look in the next 10 or 20 years, lots of different partners emerged within student ministry mission trips. There was a Roseland trip. Actually, I went on that trip when I was an intern in Chicago, and that I don't even know how long. I think Jeff started that trip too. It's maybe 15 years of every summer bringing a lot of students down there. Milwaukee has been a partner of us, or we've at least served in that city with a few different partners for about 10 years or so. Cabo has been, again, since about 2010, I think, a long-term partner. Puerto Rico was a Lead 222 trip, as well as Toronto there on the bottom, that we've spent time, multiple years for each trips through the Lead 222 partnership, which I'll talk more about that in a moment. And then you see, kind of leading into this decade, 2020 was Lead Impact. That was our local serve week in the midst of COVID craziness. 2021 was the first Twin Cities trip with, as John said, about 100 and some odd students and leaders. And then this past summer was the Twin Cities again, and we brought the incoming senior group to Ecuador. There was about 15 or 16 of them there on that trip. And I think, as you can probably assume or tell, like at this point in the world, we have obviously our 2023 plans, what the trips will look like. And when I was making this little timeline, I just kind of paused for a moment and just reflected on, even in the midst of these last 3 years, just how faithful God has been and how he's provided a way for us to be able to get creative and do different things, but still be able to bring students along and put them in a different environment and be able to serve and make great partnerships and friends with John and Keenan. And yet at the same time, it's kind of a one step at a time. Like I'm kind of a planner. I like to think, like, what will it look like in 2027? Beth has told me, you don't know. Like, I have no idea. We're kind of in this like awkward, I don't know if this will be the same plan in 2024. Maybe, probably not. Just kind of this one step at a time. But we've seen God be faithful with a lot less time at hand. And so excited and looking forward to see what happens down the road. Go to the next slide here, Brett. I always think it's important at this stage in the mission trip process to kind of talk about what mission trip involvement looks like, or maybe a better way to say that is like who really should be involved on a mission trip. I think one of the things that I've continued to grow in my understanding of and learn about. I've been on staff now for 8 years, and in the last several years, I think I've really learned more about just like a really clear discipleship process. We've talked a lot about as a next gen team at Chapel Street, how to help walk alongside of you guys as parents, who we believe are the primary discipler of teenagers, but how to help walk alongside of you to, as a church, build a discipleship process from birth. Like you saw my 2-year-old daughter probably running around somewhere there, from birth all the way through to 18. Like, how can we build a clear arc that has certain things that we talk about with preschool students and certain things that elementary school kids should learn and know about the gospel, and kind of all the way through to high school graduation, or even college and young adulthood. And it's a thing that we've been spending tons of time as a team thinking about and talking about and working on and praying about. But I think one of the things that we've always kind of mentioned is that somewhere in the high school realm comes the discipleship. Like in that discipleship process comes mission trips. And I think one of the things that we've continued to identify is that we want to make sure that students that go on a mission trip are in a place where they are best able to be successful and best able to understand kind of why they're going to be a part of that. And also, as we serve with these other partners, to be able to effectively share some of the elementary truths of the gospel with the people that we serve with and interact with along the way. And so there's a page in your packet that talks a little bit more specifically kind of about what that looks like, but there's a couple quick points to that. The first point is that we just really believe that it's important for students that are going on these trips to be known within this community leading into the trip. Obviously, we'll do team building and things along the way as we prepare for the trip, but to be known means being in a small group here at Chapel Street, being involved at Chapel Street in some capacity, and so that there's leaders and other adults or staff members or key volunteers that have relationship with students. Whether they might not all go on the trip, those adults, but be able to say like, yeah, I think this kid is at the point where they're ready for this trip, or maybe, not for some reason, or that there's just a reality that it's increasingly going to be beneficial for us as we're bringing kids on trips, whether domestically or internationally, that they're students that we know of and know well and that are known by other people in the community as well. International trips, this has been something that I've mentioned in every mission trip meeting I think I've done, that in order to be eligible to be involved on an international trip means that a student must have previously gone on a domestic trip. There's been a little wonkiness with COVID and some of the, having no trips available to students there for a short season, but that would be one of the things that we've always kind of done within short-term student mission trips. And so I don't know what that looks like for you or for your student. Maybe they haven't gone on a trip before and they're eyeing the chance to go to Ecuador or maybe to go to Cabo sometime in the future. It's kind of an intentional discipleship stepping stone throughout. Like these trips are in the order that they are and at the stage that they are for a reason. And we think it's really important. Not every student will walk through each trip the exact, intended way, but to be able to have served domestically and get some kind of scope of what missions are before we start sending them on airplanes and out of the country. And then on that sheet as well, it just talks about if you're not involved, if you've got questions maybe about where you are, where your student might be, my email address is there and my iPad's falling, but would love to have a conversation with you and help explain anything if you have further questions about that. Next slide. Now we'll just take a few minutes. If you have the packet, there's a lot more information about each of the trips in this packet, especially if you kind of roll near the end of the packet to the frequently asked questions section. There's similar questions and specific answers for each trip in this packet. I just thought it'd be helpful briefly, and I'll have Rick, especially in Ecuador, help me with this, but just to briefly kind of give you an overview of what each trip is. I'll spend less time here because this Milwaukee trip is for incoming freshmen. I'm actually going to Access next week to do kind of this for current 8th grade parents, but maybe some of you also have an 8th grader as well. This is a trip that, like I said, we've done for many years. We started with a different partner in Milwaukee and then shifted to City on a Hill because they were actually a group that we served with that other trip. And we've probably done trips to City on a Hill since maybe 2016 or something along those lines. It's been a while. And we haven't been able to do it because of COVID, but we're excited to be able to come back and partner with them. And you see here on the screen, their missions focus service, compassion, evangelism, and racial reconciliation. They essentially, on this trip, it's a shorter trip, like 5 or 6 days, they pretty much spend one day really focusing in on each of those categories. They teach students about it. They allow students to experience it. They go and pray with people on the streets. For example, for evangelism, they do a poverty simulation and different things like that. But they also do a really good job of helping students kind of debrief what they're experiencing. Me and Gretchen Gilbert, who used to be on staff here, would always say, like, once the student's gone on this trip, like, we really feel like they could go serve anywhere because they give such a good foundation and framework for what is missions and why do we serve. They do a really, really nice job with that. And being shorter, I think, is good for incoming freshmen. And I'm excited personally for the chance for that class to kind of have their own trip this summer to really gel together as they prepare to come into this craziness at the beginning of next fall. We'll take time at the end for questions. If you have any questions about that trip, I'd be happy to help answer. But we'll keep moving over to the Twin Cities. And we got John and Rick here from Godtown here tonight. Obviously, we've heard John share, and maybe some of you have met him in the past. But the Twin Cities trip, Godtown is one of the partners that we serve with, but really the trip and the primary partnership that we have is with Lead 222. My guess is if you've been in one of these before, you've heard a lot about Lead. It's been a mission trip partner of ours for probably over 15 years or so. And really at its core, Lead 222 is a network of youth pastors, so coaching and accountability and different things like that. I'm a part of that. Jenny Allen actually was hired through a Lead 222 hiring process that they do. And many other youth pastors that have been here throughout the years have been involved in Lead. And one of the branches of Lead is missions. And so I mentioned earlier Cabo, Puerto Rico, Toronto, all those trips that have been through Lead in the past. And the Twin Cities is really the reason we were able to do this trip in 2021 is because I called Matt, who's the director of Lead Missions, and said, like, where could we create a trip just for our church, for all the COVID reasons, where we could still go serve somewhere? And Matt lives up in the Twin Cities and is friends with John and Keenan, and he said, come to the Twin Cities. And so we were able to build that trip together. And so primarily we serve with Godtown. They're our main missions partner throughout the week. We stay at a church in Woodbury, Minnesota. It's maybe 20 or 30 minutes from St. Paul. We also serve with a few other local ministries that John has relationship with, and they kind of partner together as well. Pain Reliever Church, Hearts and Hammer. I never get that right. I always want to say like something different. I don't know. But we served with a few different groups in the past, but really all of those groups in that same kind of similar community focus on many of these similar things. Community outreach, evangelism. If you know John or you heard him share tonight, obviously he's got a heart and really a gifting to sharing the gospel and evangelizing with people. And then neighborhood projects. That ranges a lot of things, but one of Godtown's main neighborhood projects is their community garden. Actually, Keenan, would you mind, could you give us like 2 or 3 minutes talking a little bit about your community and the neighborhood garden stuff that you guys have and kind of what we've done? Sorry to put you on the spot. Just give you a couple minutes to give a little context to that, and then we'll keep moving.
Hello. Yeah, so we have 2 community gardens, the Lily Pad and the Eden Garden. And essentially, we started this probably, what was it, like 12 years ago or something like that? And this has become like almost like a platform of building relationship with the police officers, with a biker gang. It's eliminated crime in areas because a lot of these areas that the government has actually given to us for very, very, like, it's not, the price isn't even worth mentioning, like $5 or something, takes those spots that were used for like crime and dealing drugs and sex trafficking, and now there's gardens. It's beautiful. It's literally transformation to your eye. You can see it. And so what we had the kids do was just go through and essentially advance our garden project another like probably 2 or 3 years worth what we could do on our own, which is really cool. But what it does is it just speaks volumes to the community in ways that I don't think we could have predicted. And so, yeah, it's just such a huge blessing when we have big groups like that come in, like you guys, and come in and just knock out a bunch of stuff. It literally draws people's attention. People end up coming on by as we're working, and they're just curious, right? And what happens is we just get to share the gospel with them. We get to pray for them. We get to build that relationship with another neighbor, another government official, another police officer, another person that's like, I didn't even realize you guys were here, but they saw all those kids in there, and then they're like, whoa, what's going on over here? And they stop by. So it's just really cool. It's a really cool time just to create opportunities that you can't make it up. You can't plan some of this stuff. So, yeah.
Yep. Keenan? I love that picture up on the right side too. That is in the community garden, and that's what you can expect if you come. If your student comes or you come with us to the Twin Cities. We'll move on to Ecuador. Brad and Rick, you can come up and join me as well. Rick shared a little bit about his story of his family and El Refugio. The partner that we have is Hacienda El Refugio, which is a part kind of under the missions umbrella of One Collective, which Rick could share more about, but it has a lot of different ministry partners all throughout the Ecuador area. But I thought, Rick, if you wouldn't mind sharing just a little bit more of your story and kind of how El Refugio came to be.
Okay, so yeah, I mentioned a little bit about my dad grew up here in Geneva and was from this church. And he and Mom were, I believe, the first missionaries sent overseas from Chapel Street here. And So my parents went down to Ecuador. That was a new mission field that was opening up for translation work, and they started their work there amongst the Kofan people. This was the same time that the 5 missionaries were martyred in the jungles of Ecuador. Mom and Dad knew all those guys, and Dad was on the ground search party that went in to the beach where the 5 had been killed by the Guarani people, and my dad helped find 4 of the bodies and bury them there at the beach. And so that's the era that they were involved in at the beginning of their time in Ecuador. And then they worked in the village of Durango, the Kofan village there, and started translating the Bible into the language of the people there. So that's where I grew up, and growing up there, that it really developed in me this great heart for missions, great heart for God's great outdoors and all that He had taught me through that. And I always had this thing in the back of my mind, man, I'd just love to have this place that we could use to bring people to the Lord through His beautiful creation. So Sue and I had come down to work in the jungles. We were planning on doing an aviation ministry. I'd gotten my pilot's license and mechanic's license, and we were going to use that to help get the Word of God out into the jungle areas of Ecuador. But we got there, and we were getting ready to do that ministry, and because of the drug trafficking that was going on between Peru and Colombia, and Ecuador kind of sandwiched between them, they shut down all the airstrips that were out in the jungle regions, and so it kind of shut down our whole plans that we had. But God used us in another way there in the village where we had been living to help with the church. The church was really struggling at that time, and we helped in the leadership training of the people there to develop a good, strong church that is going well today. That we're really just blessed by the Lord. What's going on there in the Kofan village with the Kofan people. Sue and I were there for 4 years working with the Kofan church, living in the jungle. We came back here to the U.S. and youth pastored in Michigan for a while. And during those years, I would go down to Ecuador with doing a missions team from our church and spending some time out in the village staying in our house there in the village too. And a friend of mine, Russ Klein, was working in Ecuador. He had recently come down to work with the youth leadership in churches in Ecuador to give them help in training youth leaders to work with the young people in the churches there in Quito. So I came down to Ecuador with my missions team. Russ was a good friend of mine from high school. We had both grown up in Ecuador. And Russ, I remember him calling me up. He said, "Oh, I heard you were in Ecuador." And I said, "Yeah, I'm here for a little while and with a team." And he said, "Rick, could you come on over to my house? Would you have any time? I just want to brainstorm with you. How can we better reach the youth of Ecuador?" So I went over to his place, and I remember sitting in his living room there and talking about this. And I said, "Russ, I just think it would be so great to have a place where we could get kids out of the city, get them in God's creation, and use that as a starting point, an avenue that we could speak to them about the Lord, and the Lord speak to their hearts in a place that's out of their chaotic lifestyle." And I started hearing from Russ, "Rick, that sounds great. Why don't you come down and let's get a ministry like that started?" And so with that, we'd prayed about that, and the Lord made it clear to my wife, Sue, and I that, yeah, this is what your next step is to be. So we join one collective, the mission that my Russ Klein was with in 1998, and raised support and headed down here to Ecuador. And again, Chapel Street was right behind us. They supported us from the very beginning as we headed down to Ecuador to begin the ministry of El Refugio. So first thing was to look for property, a place that we could start this ministry in, and God just worked. There are so many beautiful, wonderful stories of his blessing, of how he worked in us to have the place that he had in mind, and just helped us, and with a partnership of churches like yours, to develop the place that we had so that it would be useful, utilizable for ministry. And so El Refugio was started to be developed and used as a great ministry that is reaching so many kids. We have over probably I think it's at least 2,000 kids, or not just kids, but adults and kids that come out every year for our retreats. We have discipleship programs going on. It's a great ministry, and people come out to El Refugio. They come out of the city and all of busyness, and they're just out in this beautiful mountainside, in a beautiful facilities there, and just a calm, beautiful place where God can speak to their hearts. And we run them through all sorts of adventure stuff too while they're there, but our focus always comes back to giving them time to listen to God's voice in their life. And so many people have come to know the Lord through the ministry there, or have been strengthened in their walk with him. And we're excited about Chapel Street and the partnership. They've been with us for all these years and helping us develop this ministry. It's been really great, and your church has been such a wonderful help to us. And these teams of high school students, like I said earlier, they're worth it. It's worth it for us to have them come. It is such a blessing. We get so much work done with a whole bunch of kids that are gung-ho about getting things done. We get so much more developed there that we can use for the Lord's work. And we love on kids in our community, and that has just been a great witness and testimony to the community, and a help to our relationship as a mission there with the people of Ecuador. So we love Chapel Street student teams, and they are such a blessing to us. And then we get to pour into them too, and see them take steps in their walk with the Lord too. And that's been a blessing for us. So, yeah. I guess you got it. Okay. Anything else?
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Rick. And so, kind of like Rick said, and you see on the slide there as well, when student teams are there, we get to experience the adventure stuff. They've got all kinds of different things that they bring groups through. We get to experience nature and spend intentional time focused on God. And then we do some of these other things as well. Vacation Bible School, construction projects. It's kind of hard to look around El Refugio and not see something that somebody at Chapel Street has built or been a part of helping with. And then we do take a trip to the jungle, and we do some tourism there, and there's a waterfall we hike to and do some baptisms. And also there's some ministry partners that they've built throughout the years that we get the chance to serve with there as well. And then Brett, if you could go to the Mexico slide. Like I said a few moments ago, we've had a long-term relationship with Cabo and with some different ministries there. In the student world, typically this trip was through the Lead to 22 partnership as well, but last year over spring break, we were able to bring this Cabo trip for the graduating senior class who hadn't had a mission trip really in their high school years because of COVID, and we partnered with Global Youth Force, and so it's a familiar ministry and church that we had partnered with in the past, Ramona Venecia. Maybe you've heard those names, but through the Global Youth Force partner, and then on that trip, got to do many of the same things as you've heard on some of the other trips: intentional community outreach, construction projects. I was there for a few days and was at a church site with some of the students, and it looked just like a pile of rubble pretty much, but we got to build a stage, not quite like this one, but build a stage for their church, and got to spend a few days working on that, and also doing Vacation Bible School, and just chances to connect with kids specifically, and then they go on a fun boat ride and do some things as well. And so we stay at Ramona Venecia's home. He's a pastor of a church in the community. Their home is a little bit off the beaten path from like, the downtown spring break Cabo scene, but they've built additional housing, and so they can house, 30 some odd people, and even more than that. And they have a neighbor as well that we've done been able to stay at their home as well. And so it's a really great trip. And for me, it was really, like, I kind of thought it was like a one-off thing that we would just do because those kids, kind of gypped for mission trips. But I was there even just for a few hours, and the chance that I had to be able to be with a bunch of kids that are about to graduate high school and have the conversations about, like, what does it look like to finish well at home, and how do you, continue a relationship with your parents and with your siblings? How do you follow Jesus? How do you navigate all the hard things that are coming for you in the next few months, and as you, graduate and have a summer and prepare to go away to college or stay local and have a whole host of different challenges. And it was really, really an amazing trip, and I'm excited for this current senior class, who many of them got to go to Ecuador this past summer to have that experience as well. Just a few more things, then we'll leave it up for some questions, but if you can go to the next slide. Brett, this is just a kind of a quick look at, the packet has much more information, but just a quick look into the mission trip process. We're having this night intentionally, a bit out of when applications open, which for Mexico, they're open already, and we've emailed a packet to you a few weeks ago if you're a parent of a graduating senior, and the applications close on Thursday. But if you're looking at Milwaukee, the Twin Cities, or Ecuador, the applications will open on, I believe it's a Wednesday, January 4th, and they'll be open through the end of January, through January 31st. And usually, I don't have to read all that there for you, but it's helpful for us to help evaluate students' readiness and be able to check in with leaders if we have any questions, or ask parents questions, and just kind of make sure we're all on the same page. And then it's also, I think, one of the things I really enjoy is being able to read through those applications and hear students share about their faith story and how other mission trips have impacted them, and other leaders or references they have at the church that just the relationships that they've been able to build with mentors throughout their years. Missions meetings, each trip has a slightly different rhythm, but many of them are together, and then we separate into each trip. But just an intentional time to both prepare us for what our missions and why are we going and how are we going, but then also, like I said, the team building aspect and the preparation, specifically for the international trips. We take time to prepare for VBS that we do and different things along those lines. There's support and prayer letters along the process. Milwaukee just does prayer letters. Other trips have the option to do support letters. If you would like to finance the trip without support, then we ask students to just write prayer letters. Everybody's writing letters asking to build a team of people to pray for them, but also if you're raising some financial support, you include that piece as well. But even if you are doing the financial support, we ask students to, I think it's a really good habit and rhythm. And one of the things we've really just seen is how much prayer works on these trips. And as we have students sending out these prayer letters, even a couple years ago, we didn't do much of the fundraising process, and just being able to see what God was able to do through a community of people around us praying with us and for us is really incredible. And then a part of the process too is serving. We do each student will have a serve opportunity. They're different for each trip, and we'll share more about that along the way. But just a chance to, again, build some unity as a team, and also kind of get a couple practice reps into what it looks like to serve other people. Many students do that at Chapel Street anyways, but it's fun when we get to partner with some of our local partners in Aurora and different places for some of those opportunities as well. And then I think this is the pretty much the last slide, but the student mission celebration is another piece of the process. Maybe you were here for that last year. It's really our main fundraiser outside of support letters for student missions. And little bit of a twist last year, trying to incorporate more of the telling of the story of what God's done and how students have been impacted by mission trips. And so I love this picture. There's a thumb in it even, but those guys are great and did a great job that night. And it's a big night. We invite the whole church family to it as well. And it'll look a little different this year than it did last year, but in a lot of ways pretty similar. And it'll be a great night to be together. And there's a live auction and a silent auction to raise money if you're unfamiliar, and different things along that line. Beth, Alyssa, any key things I've missed? I'm going to open up to some question time. Alyssa, if you could maybe help pass a microphone around. If you have a question, I know it's always awkward in a room this big, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. We'll just have you speak it into the mic so that the recording is able to pick that up. But any questions?
I feel like I'm in the Olympics.
Oh, we got Russ Crucial.
Got the baton.
I'd project, but of course I want to record it.
Yes.
I apologize because I don't have the packet in front of me if it's there, disclaimer, but are there maximum numbers for each of the respective trips as far as students? And the only reason I ask that, sometimes kids waffle, like, oh, do I do it? And it's like, the limit's 30, you better get going because we're at 28, et cetera. That's my question.
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say for the international trips, we have a certain amount of plane tickets reserved. Like for the Twin Cities, it's less of a concern because we just take vans or whatever. But we're prepared for the largest Ecuador trip, most amount of students that we've ever brought to Ecuador. But at some point, there may be a cap. I don't exactly know. I don't know if we'll reach it or not. I don't think so. It's two big grades that we've invited. Historically, juniors and seniors for many years have gone to Ecuador together. This is kind of a unique opportunity since it's been a while, but it's not out of the ordinary that we've done that. But so we've prepared for the largest, but there is, at some point you can't get on the plane. But for the domestic trips, we've pretty much done our best. And same thing for retreats to help prepare partners. Like we've been growing and kids have been coming, and we want to help be able to have capacity for as many as possible. But I guess the short answer would be perhaps for some of the international trips, if they do fill up, there may be a point where we have to displace students to a different trip. And that, again, that's not out of the ordinary as well. We've done that pre-COVID almost every year. There's been some shuffle. I don't anticipate that, but it is a possibility. Yeah, Milwaukee does have a cap, but we're not going to reach it. We've hit it. We've set it pretty high. But I guess if things go crazy, I guess perhaps it could. But yeah, other questions? I always feel like either I was so comprehensive and did a great job, you don't have no questions, or I've talked so much that you're like, just shut up and be done. We want to leave. So I'll give you just one more second. Any other questions? And if not, I'll be around, and Beth, and I know John needs to leave somewhat soon, but maybe you can mingle for a few minutes, and Rick and Sue as well. And so great. Well, thanks so much for being here. Hopefully it was enjoyable for you to be able to kind of be a part of the student aspect and the parent side as well. And let me just close us in prayer for these trips as we prepare, and then we'll have a few minutes. Students come out of their groups just before 8. God, just thanks again for tonight and just the chance we have to be together, to focus on you and to learn more about missions and what they are and what they look like. And God, just thank you for the stories that we've been able to hear from Rick and John and Keenan, and just the faithfulness just how faithful you've been throughout all these trips, and the partnerships that we've been able to develop, and just the chances we've had to work for your kingdom and do that in unity with our brothers and sisters from other places of the world. And God, as we prepare for these trips and all the things that go about that process, God, I just specifically pray for these parents as they have conversations with their students, as they talk to their spouses and maybe have questions or different things that come up in their family. God, I pray that you would just help give clarity and insight and wisdom to each of them that are evaluating having a kid come on a trip, or maybe even themselves considering coming on a trip as a volunteer leader as well. And God, there's a lot of logistics and craziness that goes into this time of year and to pull off all of these trips. But in the midst of all of it, God, we look to you and we trust you. And God, we ask that you'd be guiding our steps, and God, you'd be in the midst of all of this, and it's all yours, and so we give it to you. We pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.